Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Grand Page. I am your most humble and obedient servant, Page Ghost. Today I want to talk about I guess I would call it kind of, not a phenomenon, that word pops in my head in relation to it, but we'll call it a recurring archetype in storytelling. The ideas that I'm going to focus on are particularly movies, or the examples that I'll be focusing on for this archetype will be centered around movies. Hopefully, you will have heard of some of them, so that way you kind of catch my drift. But I think everyone's going to kind of relate to this in some way, particularly men. The recurring archetype, we'll call it. Wow, it's tough to say. I've heard it in some places being called the hunter archetype, but I feel like that's a little bit more of an umbrella term. We'll say that this is sort of a hunter archetype under the subcategory of the loss of innocence. And what exactly do I mean by that? Well, we'll extrapolate the idea of the hunter, right? The hunter is this character that looks for and seeks out evil in order to destroy it, end it, whatever the case, right? You got Doom Guy from the Doom series, you got the Punisher. You could maybe make the argument that Batman is a kind of hunter archetype too. That might be a little bit more of a loose term there, but there are those particular are characters that seek out the evil. They go looking for it to intentionally put a stop to it, right? And then you have that subcategory that I'm talking about and focusing on today. That's kind of been on my mind a lot, and that's the loss of innocence. And it's not the loss of innocence on the side of the hunter, at least not internally. It's the loss of innocence externally. If we look at one of those hunter archetypes, like the Punisher, is a really good example of this subcategory of the loss of innocence, where the Punisher, part of his origin story is his wife, his family. I think particularly in the comics, I'm not big on the comics. I've watched some of the movies and TV shows and stuff, but the Punisher in the comics, if I'm not mistaken, I know he lost his wife. I'm pretty sure he lost his son. I don't remember if there was a daughter in there or not. But nonetheless, it's not a loss of innocence within him, but rather a loss of innocence externally from those that he was connected with. And this loss of innocence causes a kind of chain reaction in him where he was this devout father, good husband, right? All this stuff, taking care of his family. And a lot of times in these hunter archetypes and loss of innocence sub-archetypes, these characters will have like a veteran kind of background, right? They were some sort of combat orientation, or maybe they were part of some other sort of violent piece, and then they corrected themselves for the sake of their family or whatever the case. In this case, specifically with the Punisher, you have, he was a war veteran. He was, I think originally in the comics, he was a Vietnam veteran. And then he's been reinterpreted a few times here and there to fit more modern times, right? Like the John Bernthal. I don't know if they ever outright say it, but I think John Bernthal, you can kind of infer that he's a Iraq war veteran. And so you have that sort of background, gets a family, wants to take care of them, makes himself better, tries to get away from the violence, and then that aspect of them is taken from them, and then they go on a warpath, right? In the Punisher's case, his family's taken away from him, and he seeks to stop every and all crime, right? And so that's sort of a really good example of the archetype that I'm looking at today, but more specifically, some movies that stand out to me with this archetype that I wanted to focus on. There's one in particular that's really been stuck in my head, but we'll focus on a few others first, just to kind of highlight how the archetype can be used, how much of a focus it is versus what the archetype's being used for and that sort of thing. I think a good place to start is the Liam Neeson movie Taken. And this is a good example of using the archetype just to make a fun action movie, right? So for those of you that aren't familiar, Liam Neeson's Taken. He's retired. He doesn't really work anymore. He's divorced, and he has a daughter. And the daughter wants to go abroad. She goes abroad. I think it might have been France. I could be very mistaken on that, so don't quote me on that. But essentially, she goes to a whole other country, and she gets taken. And then he goes on a warpath to find her again. And as serious as the premise makes it out to be, really it's just an excuse to see Liam Neeson do some really cool stuff, action hero stuff sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Totally fine with taking an archetype or, taking sort of pre-established storytelling techniques, characterizations and things like that, and just making something fun. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what entertainment is for. But it is not necessarily meant to be taken as seriously as some other films, right? And Taken is one of them. Again, nothing wrong with that. And good solid movie, good solid premise, all that stuff. Another example, I saw, it's just like Taken. It's been a while since I've seen this one too, but this one's a little bit more serious, and you could argue there's a good bit of nuance with it as well. Clint Eastwood is full of those sort of, strong male character archetypes, a wide array of them. And he fits this archetype specifically in the movie The Outlaw Josie Wales. Fantastic movie. Actually, I need to rewatch that because of how good it is. But for, again, anyone who doesn't know the premise, this takes place during... Actually, I'm kind of forgetting the time frame a little bit. I know the beginning of the movie takes place during the Civil War. I don't know if the events of the movie go beyond the Civil War. I could be mistaken on that a little bit. But the Civil War premise at least sets up the film and its events, because it starts out with Josie Wales, Clint Eastwood's character. He's a family man. He's a farm man, running a farm, just trying to make ends meet sort of thing. He's in the South, but he's not he's not necessarily he's not part of the Confederate Army, and it's not ever clearly established if he's even like pro-Confederacy or anything. I interpret it as he was more he was more just trying to get by. He didn't really care about what was happening outside of the world. And he was just trying to make a living, honest living, being a farmer and everything. And then the North, the Union Army, starts going through his area, and they burn down. Not just burn down, but like they destroy his area. They destroy his farm. They kill his wife. They kill his family. I know he had kids. I don't know how many kids he had or whatever. And he's basically left to die, right? And so that loss of innocence, right, that loss of his family, leads him to actually join the Confederate cause. And for anybody who's going to try and push back on this or whatever, the Union used all kinds of tactics like that. Not saying that it was right or wrong. I'm not trying to get into the ethics of it or anything like that. This is talking about storytelling, and the historical accuracy of it. The Union absolutely did stuff like that. Look up Sherman's March and how he was going to give. It was either Atlanta or Savannah. He was going to gift that to Abraham Lincoln for his birthday, right? And he just went on an absolute warpath through Georgia and a few other states, if I'm not mistaken. It's why Atlanta's mascot is the Phoenix, because it was literally burned down during the Civil War, and then it rose again and ended up being Georgia's capital city. Anyways, bottom line, Clint Eastwood, Josie Wales, he loses his family because of the Union and the absolute destruction that they ran through in his area. He ends up joining the Confederate cause, at least for a time. I don't think forever, but he really does, for a time, go on this warpath until he starts rediscovering. See, this is why I need to work on the title of this subcategory, because it's not as simple as loss of innocence, because you can actually gain it back, so to speak, because Josie Wales does this by having a kind of he kind of ends up adopting a family. He finds a Native American. Well, actually, he finds two Native Americans along the way. One very old man that kind of helps him out, and then he ends up rescuing a Native American woman who was being sexually abused, to put it lightly. He rescues her, and then she repays him by helping him out with things. And he meets a few other people along the way. He gets into tussles, wins them all, right? But it's really, while Taken was sort of this action entertainment oriented movie about a man and his loss of innocence, Josie Wales is about the loss of innocence and how you can gain it back despite whatever tough times you might run into. If you had to ask me, I'd probably recommend Josie Wales over Taken. Both great movies, but I feel like Josie Wales has more interesting action and also has a more interesting message, more interesting story, that sort of thing. So two great movies that I think really illustrate this sort of subcategory of archetype. But to get to the movie that I really wanted to talk about, and I actually recently watched this. This was probably like a week or two ago. Law Abiding Citizen with Gerard Butler and Jamie Foxx. And before I get into like the archetype talk and stuff, it is worth talking about that ending. So I've heard online, bottom line, I think everyone pretty much agrees that the ending is not great. To its credit, they do a decent job of setting up this ending, no matter how terrible it is. I agree that it's a terrible ending, but it's not. It wasn't badly set up, so it still makes sense. The ending still makes sense to an extent, but there it is. There's no cathartic payoff because of it, right? Yeah, Jamie Foxx stops lawyering. He stops making deals with murderers and all that stuff, and so there is that lesson to it. But it is a bit of a stretch to say that Jamie Foxx and Chief O'Brien's characters outsmart Clyde. To be fair, this is why it was pretty well set up, I would say, is that they don't outsmart him. They just get information that helps them. Somebody else in the background does the work, essentially. And they establish that pretty well early enough on in the movie to where it doesn't come out of the blue. But the fact that this thing happens in the background and they don't have any real agency over it, it's maybe you could kind of categorize it as a MacGuffin I'm not really sure. But the bottom line about that ending, we can all agree, very anticlimactic. Uh, Maybe that's not the right term. Very non-cathartic. There's no sort of emotional release of tension to justify the events that occurred throughout the movie, right? But this movie does a really, really good job of like just filling out that archetype of the loss of innocence and what it can really do to a man. Josie Wales does a really good job of illustrating that though you can lose that innocence, you can gain it back. You can go back to it, and you don't have to sink deeper, right? Law abiding citizen, I think, is a look at the loss of innocence and then dipping down even further into becoming just an absolute monster. And that's not a dig at the movie, right? Because everyone is on Clyde's side with this, right? He sees this broken system. Yes, I said broken system, and that's ultimately what he's at war with. Jamie Foxx just has no clue why he's doing this, which is just baffling to me. He's this lawyer guy, supposedly super smart, going to school for however many years, and being a lawyer for however many years, and you just can't fathom this idea that it's not about him, and rather it's about this larger idea, this larger problem. But whether you're on Clyde's side or not, and I am on Clyde's side, let me be clear about that. I am on Clyde's side, but he really really falls down because of the things that he's willing to do to accomplish his goals, in particular when it came to Darby, that guy who killed and did all those horrible things to Clyde's wife, killed his daughter, did all of that in front of him. Absolutely horrible thing to witness, and I think any husband, any father, would succumb to that urge to enact vengeance, revenge, in some cases, and in a lot of cases, I'd argue justice, especially in a system that's so broken. But yeah, so it's a really, I would argue, law-abiding citizen is this really interesting study into a character that sees no point of return, of not being able to come back from what they've lost, and just keeps going down, and is committed to that journey of going further down and further down, if it's for this goal of upsetting the establishment, so to speak, right? This establishment that was supposed to help him and it didn't. There's a really good scene that clearly illustrates Clyde's problem, and still Jamie Foxx just cannot fathom any of this. It's absolutely mind-boggling. But there's that moment close to the end, not quite, but like almost there, sort of thing. Maybe you could argue it's like the climax, the turning point of the film, where Jamie Foxx is trying to just understand. We might have lost the case. That both these guys would have gone free. I was trying to get some kind of justice, and Clyde the entire time is just, despite being on his knees, he's absolutely on the moral high ground, right? That you didn't even try. You didn't try to actually go for real justice. You could have tried, and you could have held your head high leaving that courtroom, and I could have lived with that, right? And I think everyone sort of has this like headcanon so to speak, of what if Jamie Foxx had just taken them to trial, right? And what if they might have gone free? Clyde would have just carried out his own vengeance, and he might have even, turned himself in, right? But he meets the absolutely wrong lawyer, the lawyer who sort of represents the real problem, so to speak, and he's not just Clyde. He's not just after revenge for his family, but he's after this system that let killers and monsters free on innocent people like his wife, like his child, right? And he has this constant reminder with him of this bracelet that his daughter was making for him. Says "Daddy" on it, and some really really good moments, callbacks to that, right? There are a few times where it calls back to his family, particularly Jamie Foxx tries to use it and say, what would your daughter or what would your wife think of you killing in their name? How they feel about that. Really good line. They can't feel anything. They're dead. It's an interesting perspective to introduce because on the one hand, yeah, like they probably wouldn't be okay with the man that he'd become, right? But at the same time, if they were able to even communicate that, it means that they would still be there in some aspect, in which case he would have never become that man in the first place. Sort of another sort of phrase that captures this idea of the loss of innocence is that that man who has nothing to lose, right? Clyde, Josie Wales, at least at the beginning of the film, after he loses his family, that sort of dangerous man who has nothing to lose, sort of thing. He's willing to do anything to accomplish his goals. And what's especially dangerous is whenever they're super smart, super capable, right? Like in Clyde's case, he's a engineer, he's a tinkerer, he makes lots of gadgets and stuff like that. And also he's just smart in general. And so by applying himself, he basically more or less becomes a lawyer, right? He studies up on a lot of case law and things of that nature. He doesn't go to school officially or anything like that, but he has walls of these lawyer books that he's been reading for 10 years. He's basically a lawyer. He can represent himself in court and stuff like that. He doesn't need a lawyer to represent him, that sort of thing. But this character type, this archetype, is so compelling because these things happen. These things happen in real life, where family, a wife, a child is taken away from a man, taken away from a husband, taken away from a father. And there are even movies of like the woman, right, losing her husband, losing her significant other, losing her child. Admittedly, those don't come to mind, but then again, they're not necessarily marketed to me per se. But I'd certainly be interested in some recommendations. If I'm not mistaken, I think Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill might fill this archetype. Feel free to say that I'm way off on that in the comments. But I think, anyways, I'd definitely be interested in the flip side of this. What happens when a woman goes on the warpath after losing her significant other, losing her child, whatever the case. Because just the general archetype of loss and then becoming a monster to get revenge, upset the establishment, very, very fascinating. And so that's all something that I've been very interested in lately. So if I haven't said it, I highly recommend Law Abiding Citizen. Despite that ending The rest of the film is really, really good. Some very grisly scenes here and there, so be prepared for that. Josie Wales is also a really good one. What I really like about Josie Wales is being made in the 70s or 80s. It feels like those movies move at a much slower pace. So there's good build up, good tension of scenes, good character moments, all that stuff. Same thing with Law Abiding Citizen, but just being a little more modern, a lot more cuts and things like that. So that just might be my old man sort of tendencies popping out there. But both of those really good movies. Taken, again, still really good. More entertainment value than anything. It's not really trying to have a necessarily a larger conversation about that archetype and what happens to a man when he loses what matters to him, sort of thing. But still, definitely worth watching. Highly recommend all three of those movies, and I look forward to any recommendations that you guys have in the comments below. As always, I am your most humble and obedient servant, Page Ghost.